Hello. Hello, this is John O'Shea, Woodhouse College English Department. I'm going to go through how I would answer the Gothic Unseen extract for OCR English literature. I'll try and be as quick as possible. Okay, my advice is start broad and then narrow and become more kind of focused on specific details as you go on. So start with the title and date and see what this holds in terms of what makes the Gothic extracts Gothic, and consider the date of the extract as well. So this is Charles Dickens, The Haunted Man. Let's start with the date, 1848. So this is the second wave of Gothic, and we might expect the influence of Poe here with maybe urban Gothic. Let's take the title, The Haunted Man. So obviously we've got maybe some sense of guilt, some secret that haunts the man, possible doppelganger, and obviously something supernatural. So start broad like that. Okay, how do I know about all the different waves of Gothic? I might read this book on the Cornell website. It's 38 pages. It will tell me about the different waves of Gothic. Try to contextualize your Gothic extract that you get in the exam. Okay, so maybe start with what makes the text typically Gothic. What conventions are you going to look for once you've kind of talked about a particular wave of Gothic? And you can then compare the extract with other extracts that you might come across. Now remember, the focus on this question is on the extract in front of you, not talking at length about other extracts, but you can bring them in to illustrate what you see in this extract. One of the things I always tell students is to look for words that sort of create the setting or the mood of the piece. Now you've got a Gothic piece, so you're going to get some kind of gloomy kind of description. Look at words that suggest the five senses so that the reader is placed within the world. Remember that Gothic writers are trying to terrify the reader, so in a sense they want to put the reader within the world of whatever's happening so that we feel what the characters are feeling. So look for the verbs or adjectives that are going to convey the five senses of touch, sight, taste, etc. You're also looking for things that create a sense of impending doom. So anything that might be foreshadowing some later event that doesn't actually happen, or any sense of growing unease or tension. And tone, humour, irony. Sometimes they might throw you an extract which is maybe a pastiche or a parody of Gothic, and you've got to maybe pick up on how this might be ironic or humorous. Look for deliberate kind of over-exaggeration, perhaps, in that sense. And remember that Jane Austen, by the time she was writing Northanger Abbey, Gothic was already being used as a kind of pastiche, and it was being parodied in some ways. So consider what the tone of the writer's intentions might be. Okay, the setting here is typically Gothic. The man is alone, isolation. The descriptions are reminding us of death with the verb withered, and adjectives dead branches. Adjectives gloom and shadows that create a sense of obscurity. Ambiguity in the insubstantial processes, and an awful likeness of himself. So again, there's kind of the drama of the narrative there. Look for exclamation marks that heighten the terror. The description of the doppelganger, again, ghastly, cold, grey, sense of death, but it had bright eyes. Again, eyes are a motif in Gothic. Why? Are they reminding us of something that we'd rather not see? And its movement seems kind of uncanny, motionless without sound. The uncanny is continued with the use of pronouns. He sat in his chair, it leaned. Again, so the pronouns an appalling copy, suggesting it's not quite real. The something, again, what is it? We're not sure. Suspense is created. Okay, when you've moved on from how the setting is established, then you perhaps could have another paragraph about characterization. Put simply, look at what characters say, what characters do, the verbs that are used to describe their actions, and what others say about them or how others react to them. The key here is look at verbs and look at any symbolism attached to the descriptions of the characters. Okay, in most Gothic extracts we've seen so far, there's been deliberate uses of opposites and parallels, and so we're going to look structurally here. So remember, it's language, form, and structure. So you've got to look at the structure within the extract, and often this is an area to look for. So you might see an extract that has both descriptions of the outside and then descriptions of the inside that kind of mirror or contrast each other. So look for these, or opposing emotions. Okay, take a moment to read this extract. Okay, we see that power resides with this phantom here. This phantom, again, something Gothically, what's the word? Abhuman, supernatural. The mirroring of the dialogue suggests that perhaps the phantom is a part of him. They're mirroring each other. But the descriptions again in the dialogue reminds us of death, foreshadowing what's coming, or fire, connotations of hell. You want to be looking out for individual words like this. Why do you haunt us thus? Again, the description is now the name given is the ghost or the spectre, the phantom. Again, something supernatural. But the power resides in the supernatural being who doesn't seem to explain itself. Again, it's trying. Suspense is created because we don't know what this being is. So maybe this is some kind of revenant, haunting from the past, paranoia. We're never really sure. Is it the terror of the mind, as Poe sort of seemed to focus on? The power is in the silence. Okay, take a moment to look at the kind of things that you should be looking out for. A01, of course, is you're trying to demonstrate that you understand the different terminology that's being used by the writer. But you're not just listing things, you're trying to convey how they're being used for a specific intention, to create terror or to establish character. But be careful not to just list things you see, but to explain their effects. Okay, take a moment to look at this. So here, the deliberate paralleling of actions are creating suspense. We don't know what's going to happen. The pace is slowing down. Repetition of actions just increases the anxiety of the reader to know what's going to happen next. So as you're going through the extract, you're hopefully being reminded of things that you've read either in the Bloody Chamber or in the other extracts that you've looked at, or in your wider Gothic reading. So obviously the use of Doppelganger here is something particularly recurrent in Gothic fiction, particularly in late Gothic fiction, but also in early first-wave fiction like Frankenstein, and this idea of one mirroring the other, perhaps one's own sins being mirrored. Or, even with Macbeth, the idea of a ghost coming back, our own sins coming back in body form to haunt us. It's worth having one paragraph looking at the narrative technique of the extract that you're looking at. And remember, narrative technique can be something that you can compare with other texts as well. But really, you're looking at either a first or a third person narrative technique, or perhaps multiple narratives within an extract. One of the things you want to look at are what are the advantages of each. And John Mullen's perspectives on YouTube might be worth looking at, as well as these links to other narrative perspectives. As part of your revision, look at what are the advantages of first-person narratives that maybe are unreliable, maybe don't tell the whole picture, and a third-person narrative that gives a kind of sense of distance, but could also be in some ways intrusive as well. Let's look at some examples here. Consider the use of punctuation here. Here, the third-person narrative is interjecting. This was the dread companion of the haunted man. So why is it? Is the narrator intruding on the action? Is this the narrative trying to sort of create some emotional resonance in the reader? Here's another example here by Shelley that we used as your mock in January. Here, the third-person narrator isn't simply describing the action, but is starting to question what's happening to the individual in the story. Who's going to look out for them? Who will listen with pity to her narrative of woe? Sometimes third-person narratives can take on free and direct speech. They can kind of start to mimic the thought processes of the character they're describing. Or the narrative starts to become intrusive and is almost questioning of the action itself. Look at where there's shifts in third-person narration. As part of your paragraph looking at narration, it might be worth looking at the pace of the extract. So long sentences are going to slow down the pace, increasing the tension and suspense to a point where the reader is tense because they know something is about to happen, but it's delayed and delayed and delayed. Whereas other times, if a character's in a particularly sort of hectic moment, the sentences might be short, fast, breathless, that might mimic the heightened emotions of the character at that moment. So consider suspense and terror and how the extract is using long sentences to draw out or short and heightened sentences to create a sense of terror, and put that into your paragraph on narration, because this is to do with structure, I suppose. And remember, A02 is language form and structure. As part of the narrative as well, you'll probably notice that suspense is created from not telling us what happens, but rather showing or hinting. So look for elements that we get a deliberate sense of unease. And this can be shown through the foreshadowing or deliberate patternings or symbolism that hint at a horror that we're not told. So writers will often show rather than tell. And this creates a sense of terror for the reader because we're never shown exactly what the horrific thing is. Consider the film Jaws and why it was successful. We never saw the rubbery shark. A lot of students, when I mark extracts, their response fades away, so they don't look at the last paragraph. It's really important you look at the ending of the last paragraph. How has it changed from the beginning? Consider the journey of the whole extract. How has it shifted, or how has it returned back to what the first extract is? Let's look at an example from The Haunted Man. Take a moment to just read the end. But what we see here is the narrative kind of moves away from the haunted man and his doppelganger, and it's slowly moving away. Now we're looking at a remote part of an empty old pile of buildings on a winter's night. Again, a sense of darkness and loud wind are suggesting or showing something uneasy is happening. It's mysterious. We're not told. We move away. Now we're zooming out to a world, to the stars, to galaxies in eternal space or darkness. And we're never really told what happens. And so that increases the sense of terror. What has happened to the old man? We are not told. And that should be something you engage with. Okay, so we're getting to the end now. When you're considering the extract, contextualize the extract and contextualize the quotes that you're looking at. Who says what or who is being described? Don't just talk about an isolated quote without contextualizing what it refers to. You might see other contextual ideas within the extract. We've talked about how this extract is placed within mid-Gothic, the terror of the mind, hauntings or guilt. But there's certainly the abhuman and parallels that you can come across in your other texts. The important thing, I think, is to don't lose track. This is a close analysis of this extract. Your focus is on the extract. And remember, be concise and specific with your links to other texts. Remember, don't just link according to action or character, but narrative technique is an area that often students can gain marks from comparing with other texts. And also sort of the attitudes and values within the text. You can contrast. Some people always look for parallels, but you can always look for differences as well. That's important to remember.